Going to go ahead and play the video, and then we'll talk about the papers, the second papers, like what you would prefer to do. What you prefer to do with them. Personally, my preference would be that you get to do that you get to add on to the first paper, because I think some people it would be a good chance to sort of most people outline an argument, but a good chance to test your argument that you've been making. That'd be my preference, and then save the stuff for storytelling to the second presentation. Because at this point there's not as much that can be done with the write-up. But some papers didn't address in the first paper storytelling, some did not have a chance to address sort of the analytical methods. Some papers did not have a chance to sort of test their arguments. So if we can have papers do that, I think that would be the best. And then we'll work our way to the presentation. Again, if you're in a little bit late, see me afterwards so I can remember to mark you in as. And if you prefer the last little bit, I'll be happy to, or not happy to, but I will talk about this weekend events of politics, including what issues. Everybody can get into. It's one of the few days where you're like, oh my gosh, this is one of the few days that I'm not as excited to be a teacher.
The North against South. Brother against brother.
Some ways it is.
The Civil War is the bloodiest in American history. Victory will take far more than brute firepower on the battlefield. Technology, communications, logistics. It's what happens behind the front line that will ultimately decide this battle for America's future.
I guess that part followed it.
We are pioneers and trailblazers. We fight for freedom. We transform our dreams into the truth. Our struggles will become a nation.
And I have no idea why it's. If you want to, feel free to move up. We got several seats up front.
1862. The Civil War is at its height. North and South locked in a bitter conflict for the future of America. A new kind of bullet has brought this war to a terrible deadlock. Bringing death on a scale never previously seen in warfare. Here at Metalworks in Springfield, Illinois, molten lead is beginning its journey, becoming a lethal instrument of destruction. The bullet known as the mini-ball. This crude piece of lead is the primary reason for the unprecedented levels of slaughter in this war. Invented in France, just an ounce in weight and half an inch across, one person can cast 3,000 mini-balls an hour. Each one of these simple bullets can rip through a man's body in a fraction of a second.
It looks small, but anybody ever been to a Civil War battlefield? I take students up to Civil War battle sites or so. I did so in January of this year. Took a class over to Pickett's Mill, which is outside of Atlanta. And we had some students who were there, and they gave each of us one of these mini balls. And they look pretty small. I mean, they look like an ordinary pebble. When you pick them up, they will not be mistaken for an ordinary pebble. The first reaction all the students have is, oh my gosh, this is like heavy. You know, it's not like a rock. It may be the size of a rock, but it's several times the weight of a rock. And it's very heavy, and it's very lethal once it punches through either skin or bone.
mini ball is used by North and South alike. Demand for this killer bullet runs so high that an entire industry springs up, supplying mini balls to the front line. In total, the North makes over 500 million mini balls, ready to be fired from the 2 million muskets it supplies to its men.
You'll remember the Revolutionary War, the difference between a rifle and a musket.
First modern war, because it was the first war that took place after the Industrial Revolution had begun to transform our country.
It will take over 33 hours for a bullet in this box to travel the 800 plus miles to the battlefield, ready to find its target. The new musket is much faster to reload than traditional weapons. Load the gunpowder, ram down the bullet, and it's ready to fire.
Imagine warfare where your ability to load a musket faster than the guy with the other musket would determine if you lived or died.
It's actually the Americans who invented the term ready, shoot, aim. It used to be ready, aim,
Wounds on the
fire.
inside of the
It used to be
barrel.
ready, fire.
Rifle. Spin the ball toward its target. Improved accuracy and range are a deadly combination.
1 second, everything's great. The next second, your buddy's head's gone, or his arm's flying off.
You don't want to know what a soft metal musket ball does when it enters the human body.
On impact, the bullet flattens out. Bone shatters and splinters. Causing further damage to muscle and tissue. More often than not, the result of a direct hit, death.
They put a sniper's weapon that only a dozen people would carry on a battlefield into everybody's hands.
But for all the mini balls
Army several
technological
times the
edge,
size of those of the
the Army
Revolutionary
still
War,
uses traditional military tactics.
which means get within range of your enemy, which is traditional musket range.
What made it particularly tragic was modern technology needing much more ancient tactics. So the death rates were truly appalling.
The troops still face one another openly, in lines across the battlefield. But the mini ball is accurate over a range of 600 yards, easily spanning this distance. And it can be reloaded 8 times faster than a traditional weapon. The effects are catastrophic. The kill rate increases dramatically compared to previous wars. Across the battlefield, the results are carnage, blood and death on a previously unseen scale.
They kill each other in droves, in lines, and in piles.
Combine the right things and something amazing happens. That's our...
In piles.
Soldier Alexander Hunter writes,
One lay on his face with his body almost in 2 parts. Another was shot just as he was taking aim. One eye was still open while the other was closed. one arm extended in a position of holding his rifle, which lay beside him on the ground.
The troops on both sides must live in the middle of this untold death and suffering. Horatio Chapman records the experience in his diary.
The dead in some places were piled upon each other, and the groans and moans of the wounded were truly saddening to hear. Some were just alive and gasping, but unconscious. Others were mortally wounded and were conscious of the fact that they could not live long.
By the time of the North's final victory, over 600,000 men on both sides are dead, some 2% of the entire U.S. population. In current population terms, that's the equivalent of 6 million people. Almost half of the dead remain unidentified. The fear of dying forgotten on the battlefield leads soldiers for the first time to begin pinning their names and units on their uniforms. These crude, early versions of the dog tag will make it possible to identify their bodies after they're killed. For the first time, America's growing postal service means soldiers can write to their loved ones from the front. With none of today's military censorship, it allows soldiers like Robert Stiles to relay the terrifying realities of life on the front line.
The sights and smells that assailed us were simply indescribable. Corpses swollen to twice the original size. Some of them actually burst asunder with the pressure of foul gases and vapors.
Fueling this carnage lies the deep political animosity that has led to this war. In a bitter conflict that has pitted brother against brother, the South is determined to defend its independence and its system of slavery. But the North will not allow it to leave the Union of States.
We fought and lost hundreds of thousands of men on both sides, fighting for what they believed was right.
The unholy alliance of new weapons and outdated battle tactics means a body count on an industrial scale. The war is locked in a bloody stalemate. Neither side can land a decisive blow. In this bitter war of attrition, victory will come to the last man standing. August 1862, over a year into the war. General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army is readying to launch a wide-ranging assault against Union forces in Virginia. Highly motivated, fighting on their home turf, and are ready to die for Southern independence, its traditions, and its rural way of life. Its prosperity is built around a simple crop: cotton. Known as white gold, the South accounts for 2/3 of the world's supply of cotton. It brings extraordinary wealth to the Southern states. But it is wealth built on the backs of slaves. Now Lincoln's victory at the ballot box threatens this traditional way of life, the slavery it is built on. Rather than submit to Northern rule, the South decides to fight. They want a separate nation. General Robert E. Lee takes command at the head of the newly formed Army of Northern Virginia. Lee, a brilliant graduate of the elite West Point Academy, is already a veteran of the Mexican War. regarded for his effectiveness on the battlefield.
Lee could intuit the battlefield in a way that almost resembles Rommel in World War II. And as a result, he could sort of almost sense where the place would be to take the gamble and where to hit.
Manassas, Virginia, 1862. Confederate troops gather ahead of the Second Battle of Bull Run.
This is where I moved from, by the way. I was right off of the cover run.
But this Virginia woodland is home territory these volunteer troops know like the back of their hand. Rigid training and strict discipline have turned them into a formidable fighting force.
If you'd been a betting man back then, you would have bet the South would have won. The South only had to hold its territory. The North had to come and take it away. The North had to be the occupying force, which is far harder to do.
At Bull Run, Lee easily demonstrates his force's superiority. In one engagement lasting just 10 minutes, the Yankee 5th New York Regiment loses more men than any other regiment during the entire Civil War. All told, Lee's men kill over. All told, Lee's men kill over 1,700 Union soldiers. Determination and local knowledge give the South their greatest victory in the war to date. But Lee and his commanders have underestimated the nature of this conflict and of their opponent, President Abraham Lincoln. Because Lincoln is fighting a totally new kind of war, and his Southern adversaries just don't get it. A packed train speeds on its way south, ready to replenish the Union Army with fresh troops and supplies. Lieutenant George Benedict writes home.
We were stowed away in freight cars and started out of the city. The train took 600 other troops besides our regiment and numbered 34 heavily loaded cars.
The railroad, one of Lincoln's hidden weapons in this war. In one key operation ordered directly by the President, 25,000 fresh troops were sent on a 1,200-mile journey to the south. By road, it would take over 2 months. By rail, it will take these men just 7 days. Following its introduction in the 1830s, America's rail infrastructure has gradually spread its tentacles across the country. Lincoln realizes it can revolutionize the speed of troop deployments. He strikes a deal with the rail owners to put the North's railroad network under government control. It turns the railroad into a weapon of war.
Instead of armies being limited to the speed at which they can march, all of a sudden you had armies being moved to the front by rail, and more importantly, supplies.
Supplies and troops pour out of the north towards the battlefront. Some busy lines carry 800 tons of supplies a day, the equivalent of 80 railroad cars. In Lincoln's hands, The 24,000 miles of rail track in the north becomes an arm of his war machine. But the south has a far smaller network, just 9,000 miles at the start of the war, and it remains under private control. In the 4 years the war lasts, the North adds 4,000 miles of new track to its network, against just 400 miles in the South.
More of that was destroyed than created.
This inability to coordinate rail supplies will prove disastrous for the South. Even though they're just 30 miles from their capital in Richmond, in the winter of 1863, 4 rail links means Southern troops in Virginia starved. For all their brilliance and determination in battle, the South simply lacked the logistics to deliver a decisive blow. And it isn't simply rail. Lincoln realizes that victory depends on mobilizing the entire industrial might of the North behind the war effort. Production of clothing in the North doubles during the conflict. Pitchfork manufacturers start making swords, while the number of patents doubles in the course of the war. Manufacturing, technology, infrastructure, it will change the face of America. For the first time in history, industry is put behind the war effort. An approach to conflict that America will exploit in the First and Second World Wars. It is the beginning of a new integrated economy that will be the hallmark of the modern age.
That's why terrorists struck the World Trade Center on 9/11, not just the Pentagon, because they realized that we have an integrated economy.
Is a small
The economy fuels the military and vice versa.
center of this war. And at its heart, a simple device that will transform how this war is fought and won. The telegraph. The invention of Morse code in 1844 turns the telegraph into America's first tool of mass communication.
Remember how important communication was in terms of the network of riders during the Revolutionary War carrying messages
Quickly
back and
encoded,
forth.
the basic
Speeds
system
of
of dots and dashes is ideal for brief messages. Like Twitter today, it needs just seconds to send them and transcribe them. Where messengers previously took days, on horseback, over hundreds of miles, and across every kind of terrain. Now, the country's 50,000-mile telegraph network means communication is almost instantaneous. As telegraph poles snake out alongside the railroad lines, this vast country begins to shrink.
Keep in mind that's two-way communication. Orders out, orders back. Imagine your messenger taking a trip to ride forward and then ride back with the reply.
Information and decisions can flow backwards and forwards at lightning speed.
It became kind of the early version of email. Suddenly it was possible to get a message to somebody from St. Louis, to get a message in New York in a shockingly short amount of time.
Lincoln immediately realizes the telegraph's potential as a weapon of war. He insists on the installation of telegraph lines directly into the War Department. And he quickly acts to place all telegraph facilities in the Union under military control. The telegraph office becomes the central hub of Lincoln's war operation, his command and control center. He even takes to sleeping here in busy times. The telegraph office manager, David Homer Bates, is describes how Lincoln obsesses over every scrap of news from the front, sometimes reading dispatches word by word as they are deciphered.
Lincoln's habit was to go immediately to the drawer each time he came into our room and read over the telegrams, beginning at the top until he came to the one he had seen on his previous visit.
The North's telegraph network spreads its tentacles far and wide, sucking information back to Lincoln and his commanders in Washington. It gives him a vast strategic overview, providing him an unrivaled insight into his commander's tactical thinking.
Lincoln himself was able to stay on top of literally hour-by-hour developments in the course of individual battles that had never happened before.
To the irritation of his generals, it even allows him to issue his own direct orders, telling them how to fight. In one campaign, with General Lee's forces threatening Washington, Lincoln responds by telegraphing direct orders to his generals.
The exposed position of General Banks makes his immediate relief a point of paramount importance. You are therefore directed by the President to move against Jackson at Harrisonburg. This movement must be made immediately.
In the course of the war, Lincoln sends almost 1,000 telegrams from this small office. But the South never grasped the potential of the telegraph in creating a centralized command and control system. It means Southern generals like Lee must plan their battles without that kind of strategic overview.
In some cases, some generals will be summoned to Richmond, to be told what to
As
do.
the war continues, Lincoln brings down the hammer of his war machine. Industry, lines of communication and supplies, manpower and firepower are all marshaled to deliver blow after blow to the Confederate Army. But the South, bolstered by the belief in the rightness of its cause, doggedly refuses to give in. As a result, the death toll just keeps rising. At Antietam in 1862, 6,000 are killed, 17,000 wounded.
Yeah, the war almost ended right there because a Southern messenger accidentally dropped the entire plans that we had for Antietam, including troop positions and size. While he sat down to have lunch, the message fell out of his bag and he rode off forgetting about it. The Union found it with a better general that would have ended the war in 1862. Another problem with such messages lying around.
Three-quarters of all operations conducted by Army surgeons during the Civil War are amputations. Letters from Surgeon William Watson record what these battlefield ERs were like.
Day before yesterday, I performed 14 amputations without leaving the table. I do not exaggerate when I say I have performed, at the least calculation, 50 amputations. There are so many severely wounded through the joints. There are so many operations yet to be performed.
Surgeon Theodore Diamond describes the hideous wounds left by weapons like the mini ball.
The shattering, splintering, and splitting of a long bone by the impact of the mini ball is both remarkable and frightening.
An experienced surgeon can hack off a limb in just 10 minutes. Ether and chloroform are used as anesthetics. If a bullet doesn't kill you, then infection can. Gangrene is the greatest killer. Deprived of oxygen, wounds become an ideal breeding ground for Clostridium, a bacteria that releases a poisonous toxin, destroying tissue. Death can follow quickly. Approximately 60,000 amputations are performed during the Civil War, more than in any other war America has fought in. Twice as many soldiers die from infected wounds and disease as on the battlefield. This unprecedented carnage forces a complete rethink of traditional battlefield medicine. Looking after the well-being of soldiers becomes as central to the war effort as the supply of guns and ammunition.
It was actually Napoleon who revolutionized
Large numbers of women sign up as battlefield nurses.
professional care for soldiers when they're living and dying.
Clara Barton. Clara Barton is untrained and unpaid. When she starts, most nurses are men. It's a menial occupation. The remedies she proposes for the care of the wounded are simple, but revolutionary in their effect.
They want food, clothing, shelter, medicines, and a few calm, practical persons to administer them.
She insists the injured have a ready supply of clean bandages. First aid, the sorting of the wounded, of the most serious cases first. The Civil War brings in a series of innovations that form the basis of battlefield medicine to this day. 20,000 women sign on as nurses during the war. Clara Barton herself goes on to found the American Red Cross. Standards of hygiene begin to dramatically improve.
Did anybody see the FSU Miami game? Obviously, I'm an FSU fan, but now I'm bringing everybody got the Red Cross on their phone.
The bacteria that cause gangrene.
To call attention to it.
As a result, nearly 3/4 of amputees survive surgery. Gangrene becomes rare by the war's end.
In addition to insisting that hospitals be clean, which was a major factor, she also revolutionized doing nighttime surgery with lanterns above, because it used to be when it got dark, you just stop treating people. But gangrene doesn't
Lincoln
stop.
is increasingly forced to fight on a very different front. The war for public opinion.
Lincoln got elected this way, by the way. Otherwise,
portable camera,
two-term congressman recently
gory images of the battlefield,
who lost 2 Senate elections, wouldn't be well known, except he understood the power of the photograph.
Cameras rule out dramatic
good
action
pictures.
They're ideal.
That's how he won the 1860 GOP nomination. So he used it to promote outrage as well as sympathy during the war.
Their images are sold widely to members of the public for as little as 25 cents.
It was war photography coming back from the Civil War that captured it in a way, made it real, made people recognize the really extraordinary, unprecedented violence.
It wasn't even until the U.S.-Mexican War in the 1840s that you even had a battlefield correspondent,
woodcuts of the images.
somebody from the newspaper who would go out and cover a battle.
More than 200 correspondents cover the war, filing over 100 million words of copy. This deluge of information about the war ensures the grim reality of this conflict is seared into the public consciousness. Never again will politicians be able to fight wars without public support. The war means a soldier is 5 times more likely to die than a civilian. Where families used to grieve for the dead at home, now men die on the battlefield. It forces a fundamental shift in the rituals surrounding death. Nat Bowditch dies on a battlefield in Virginia. Yet his family in Boston can still say goodbye to their son. 500 miles away. Even though it has taken a week for his body to travel from the battlefield, his father describes how it is free of any signs of decomposition.
Though the marks of closely contested battle were still upon the face, the features were placid, as if he was sleeping.
That's because of the new technique known as embalming. Chemicals like arsenic and zinc chloride are injected into the corpse to halt the natural process of decay. The business of death, the preservation of bodies, turns undertakers into overnight millionaires. One undertaker boasts,
I would be glad to prepare private soldiers. They were worth a $5 bill apiece. Lord bless you, a colonel pays 100, and a brigadier general, 200.
if you've got the money, all sorts of new techniques are available. Airtight coffins and embalming are most popular. And for the wealthiest, even elaborate refrigerated coffins packed with ice. The war drags on. Lincoln is determined to end it and abolish slavery. In September 1862, he gives the South an ultimatum. Rejoin the Union. He threatens to forcibly liberate their slaves if they refuse. But the South, having tasted independence, does not want to rejoin a union where slavery would be at risk. They reject the ultimatum. Lincoln is in no mood to negotiate. If the South won't free their slaves, he will do it himself.
For white Southerners, it was a confirmation that their thoughts about Lincoln all along, that he was in fact someone who was bent on destroying what they thought was the Southern way of life. In the North, in a sense, it gave people a different understanding of what the war was about.
On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issues a proclamation abolishing slavery in the rebellious Southern states. Thanks to the telegraph, the news quickly spreads.
On the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1860,
Lincoln had totally grown to where he said that not only should blacks not be slaves, they should be treated as equal citizens with full enfranchisement, right to vote, right to participate.
all persons held as slaves shall be lived henceforth and forever free.
I never got that. What they did is it freed it was an executive order, which of course, you know, is different from the 13th Amendment, which is actually part of the Constitution. You guys see the movie Lincoln, by the way? Nothing on that? Okay. That's about the battle to actually make it part of the Constitution, freeing slaves, because not all slaves were freed by this. Slaves in the North, slaves in border states were not freed by this order. They were freed in the South. Anybody know why? Any guesses? Why would you only free some slaves? So when everyone says Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, it freed slaves only in certain regions. Anybody know why? Or how Lincoln could justify? Believe it or not, if you read Lincoln, he met with a series of African American leaders, including Frederick Douglass, in the first year or two of the war. And his proposal for African Americans was very similar to what you read about from Thomas Jefferson. In fact, it's very interesting to read that. I have many times, if I write anything about Lincoln, local Southerners will write to me, or maybe they're transplanted Northerners like myself, who knows. But anyway, they'll write to me saying, you know, Lincoln had very politically incorrect views about slaves and slavery, and he wanted to send them over to Africa. And that is true. The first year or two, that's what he proposed. He received a very negative reaction from Frederick Douglass and others. And that's when I guess he realized that this, Jefferson's policies weren't going to work for this country. But why only free them in the South? Why not free them in Missouri, in Kentucky, in Maryland, in Delaware? These are all slave states.
So slaves are killed right against the
in fact, they wanted to make sure with that telegraph and spreading news that everybody in the South would hear about it, because they had captured several areas. Like, for example, New Orleans was captured in 1862, which is one of the South's largest cities. They could spread the word through telegraph all the way down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, spread the word by message there, so that slaves would leave plantations. This would, of course, hurt the agricultural movement in the South. You'd have to use troops to stop the exodus of slaves and fight. It's something the South couldn't do. Lincoln sold it to recalcitrant Northerners as this is something that'll help the war effort. It'll lead to lots of slaves running from plantations, which is exactly what they did. And you're right, many of them did sign up to fight for the North. But why not free them everywhere? Why not free them in border states?
I guess because they weren't at war with the border states.
Yeah, and I guess the feeling was they didn't want the border states seceding as well. If you think about Washington, D.C., it's smack dab between Virginia and Maryland. I mean, Washington, D.C. would be completely surrounded. They'd have to move the capital somewhere else, most likely. It'd be cut off from the rest of the North. And it's not until the end of the conflict, 1865, that the 13th Amendment is debated. And the first vote of it actually, I believe, fails. But it was an attempt to free all slaves, border states, South, North, wherever. But that's what the movie Lincoln's about. Anybody interested in it? Let's see what I can do. I just got a copy of it. But yeah, that's what the argument was. But as Reverend Al Sharpton points out, that it didn't just say slaves are free, but it opened the door to equal treatment, which was something that was not previously on the table.
In the wake of Lincoln's emancipation of the slaves, black American soldiers rushed to enlist for the Union. Almost 200,000 sign up by the end of the war. General James Blunt describes their skill as fighters.
I never saw such fighting as was done by the Negro Regiment. They make better soldiers in every respect than any other troops I have ever had under my command.
Think about this. 200,000 is the size of Lee's army in 1864.
The Emancipation Proclamation changes the dynamics of the war. The Union Army becomes a force for liberation, now fighting to end slavery.
They understood that saving the Union would give them some sense of freedom, some sense of dignity. It was the dignity that I'm a soldier. I'm not just a servant, I'm a soldier. I have a uniform, I have stripes. I'm somebody.
Lincoln follows the proclamation with his masterstroke. His address in 1863, dedicating America's first national cemetery for soldiers at Gettysburg, is perhaps the single most famous piece of political rhetoric in history.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this nation,
conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth.
It is an emotional thing to think about people sacrificing, giving their lives for an ideal. And it's Lincoln at his absolute best the genius, the simplicity that conveys a great amount.
It's spiritual in a way. It's the hymn to America, and it's the hymn to the possibilities and the great sacrifices of this country. But in 1864, the war remains deadlocked.
What happened is up until then, the South got the better generals, and certainly the South had more experience with firearms, with hunting and stuff, and the South was better motivated in the early parts of the war.
Lincoln knows he needs to land a decisive blow.
But Lincoln puts in charge somebody who fights what's known as a war of attrition rather than a war of maneuver. Anybody know what attrition is?
He talks about wears out basically.
War,
wear
that
down.
mistake.
Take away their resources.
You just keep battering them, and it's a numbers game. If you outnumber them 2 or 3 times to 1, you'll wind up with more in the end.
The man who will lead the charge from Chattanooga to Atlanta, William Sherman. His orders to stop for nothing.
I would make this war as severe as possible and show no symptoms of tiring till the South begs for mercy.
So as Grant fights Lee, he just slams his soldiers. He actually puts his soldiers in vulnerable positions daring Lee to attack him. Because he knows he can always replace his soldiers with immigrants,
this conflict.
with the new USCT or U.S. Colored Troops regiments. The South has no new source of manpower. They refuse to even free some of their slaves to fight on the front lines, even when some
the
would.
Confederate Army. While he uses his own supply lines to maximum effect, he destroys those of the South, ripping up their railroad and bending it beyond use.
And what Sherman does is another form of new war, which is war deliberately targeting civilians rather than the other side's military.
Replaced 200,000 bullets.
And it's a similar idea to the dropping of the atomic bomb. To do something so terrible that the other side is willing to give in to end the war
Spent
early.
rounds, food, even old boots. Sherman calls it total war. A scorched earth approach becomes the trademark of modern warfare.
Actually has its origins much earlier. If you look at wars between, let's say, Hannibal and Romans, total war meant annihilating the opponents, killing them all off, not just their ability to fight, but their ability to survive.
Before abandoning their city to the Union soldiers.
The Confederate Army slipped away to Alabama to go up north to Tennessee. Sherman even said, if they want, they can go all the way to Ohio. I'll even give them rations. My job is to cut my way through the South.
Secure Lincoln's election in the fall. With Atlanta in ruins, he just keeps going. Now launching what will be his final assault, the March to the Sea. In a 19th century equivalent of shock and awe, 62,000 Union soldiers wreak a 60-mile wide path of destruction across Georgia.
He wanted to prove to Southerners that their own government couldn't protect them.
The coast in Savannah. Supply lines are cut. Villages are sacked and crops torched. Anything of military value is destroyed. Within 6 months, General Lee has tendered the Confederate Army's surrender. The rebellion is over. The South will have to submit to the Union, bring an end to slavery.
By the act of winning, the North both validated freedom and validated the industrial model. And so you have an American confidence, an American sense of achievement an American willingness to go out around the world.
For all the Confederacy's commitment, its inferior logistical infrastructure has been no match for the North's unstoppable war machine. Its industrial heartland, its growing network of railroads, its telegraph network, all bring victory to the North. Within a week, Lincoln lies dead from an assassin's bullet. But America has pulled back from the brink. The nation is once again united. And out of that unity now grows a modern, industrialized economy that will reach right across this great continent.
The lesson, hopefully, I mean, it's not just playing some video of the Civil War, but I hope you realize it is. I mean, no matter what your field is, no matter what you're going into, you know, just to understand that there's today's model and then there's tomorrow's model, and the importance of recognizing how to use, not just that it exists, but how to use it to your advantage. So it's not a Civil War piece. It's the idea about, okay, how can we use new technologies, new ideas? And the new ideas aren't just industrial ideas or economic ideas. They're also new political ideas as well, about how to reaching out to other people, building a more united front rather than just focusing on how things were always used to be. Does that make sense? I hope to y'all. I mean, it's about, okay, it's more than just the North had industry. It's how can you use industry to the maximum advantage. Here's new technology. How do you change the fighting front? So in fact, by the end of the war, we've gone into trench warfare years before World War I. You know, it wasn't invented during World War. And in fact, those who fought in Europe didn't follow the lessons of the Civil War. And that's why the brutality of what was called the Great War at the time was as such, because they didn't pay attention to history, what America had experienced. But also this idea of going over past intolerances and prejudices to say, all right, you know, the idea of arming blacks was probably unthinkable even in the North years earlier. And yes, regiments were segregated during this time. That's why I mentioned USCT. They were kept separately. Officers could only be white. Many of the black soldiers didn't receive fair pay until the very end of the war. So there were still lingering signs of this, but the North was at least open to new ideas. And so the question is, what new ideas will you be encountering or experiencing? We'll discuss more about American experience and about contemporary topics on Wednesday. I suggest you go ahead and read the Freakonomics piece about real estate agents and the KKK, that particular chapter. As for the paper, what I'm looking for is for you to expand upon existing papers that you already have. If you haven't worked in storytelling, now's a good time to do so. If you haven't worked in the analytical thinking, now's a good time to do so. Most importantly, you've all put together a lot of arguments. How do we know there's any support for the arguments that you're putting forth? I've given you some ideas about testing arguments, as I did about why the Civil War was fought, or why a particular event happened at a certain time, or even when it came to gender politics, how frequent is this? These are simple tests that can be done during class. They can be applied in your own papers as well. Think about how you would test these. I know what you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's like really hard to think about, Dr. Torres. How could I test? Remember, you're testing hypotheses. What is a hypothesis? It's a piece of the truth. You're not testing every single element of it, but what sort of rudimentary test can you come up with? It's that element, or actually 3 elements, the 3 C's all come into this. This is where creativity comes into play. This is your critical thinking. And this is also how you communicate these ideas in the paper. So I'm looking for a paper that's twice the length of the first one. You can take the paper, but rather than just do more of what you did last time, do something new with it. And that includes doing all of these things, working in storytelling, working in the analytical model, working in a true hypothesis test, describing the results. Does that make sense? Now that I have everybody here, I think only one person's missing. Does that make sense? So you've gone beyond just, here's what other people's arguments are and stuff. What are you going to do with it? How would we know that we're on the right track with something? How do we know? Do we even find something? When I did the Civil War research, I actually thought it was going to be about taxes and tariffs and stuff. I was surprised to find it wasn't. So don't be afraid to do a fair test of something and find something different from what you originally thought of. The goal is not to prove a hypothesis. Does that make sense? The goal is to test an argument and see what you find. I had a student one time say, we were going to class and the person said, so doctors, are we going to bust some myths? I said, no, we're going to test some myths. That's what you're going to do. We'll see if they're busted or not. Catch up with you on Wednesday. Start working on that second page. We'll work in the storytelling research for the second presentation. Yeah, we get like 6 pictures.
Thanks.
Only 2.